Good afternoon from Copenhagen and welcome to the webinar Carbon Reduction and Energy Efficiency in the Water and Wastewater Sector, hosted by the Copenhagen Center on Energy Efficiency. My name is Valeria. I am the research assistant at the Copenhagen Center and the moderator for this webinar. A couple of things before we move to the main content of our webinar. This webinar is going to be about 90 minutes long, including time for Q&A at the end. In case you cannot stay until the end or want to get back to our presentations, all the material and recording of the whole webinar will be available online in a few days on the Copenhagen Center's Knowledge Management System. And we have many other webinars and information there. Have a look. I'll give you in a few minutes. A few things about the Copenhagen Center. The Center conducts research and advisory activities in the field of energy efficiency and serves as energy efficiency hub for the Sustainable Energy for All initiative. The Center has established a network of global, regional, and national partners with a broad range of stakeholders to help accelerate the implementation of energy efficiency activities. On a regular basis, the Copenhagen Center is conducting webinars. All material, including recordings and presentation from previous webinars, can be found in the Copenhagen Center's Knowledge Management System under the e-learning section. The material of today's webinar will be uploaded shortly. I would like now to briefly introduce you to the speakers of today's webinar. Mohammad Almalla is Junior Technical Advisor at GIZ. Salam Almomany is Component Management Manager for Carbon Reduction and Energy Efficiency in Water Utilities for GIZ. And Nisreen Lahham is Senior Advisor for the Nexus program, the Dialogue program at GIZ Cairo office. Finally, I would like to inform you that you can send us your questions during the presentation, and we will do our best to answer as many as we can at the end. Please do not forget to mention the name of the panelist that the question is for. And now, the first presentation from Mohammad.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Valeria, for introducing us, and thank you for Copenhagen Center for providing this window to discuss and exchange ideas and case studies related to carbon reduction and energy efficiency. Today, I would like to share with you one of our projects. Before I keep on with my presentation, I would like to ask that I hope everyone can hear me quite well and you can see the presentation. Today I will be discussing an optimization case study, one of GIZ projects in Jordan. My presentation contains the following. I will start with setting the scene, discussing the global situation related to climate change and energy, where we are today. And I will compare it with the country scale in Jordan. Afterwards, I will be discussing the project, which is called with the acronym ICSI. ICSI project is in Jordan, in a specific location. I will introduce you to this location, the treatment technology there, and what is provided. Then I will be telling you about our energy and carbon check and analysis. What did we do to know what are the problems with there? Where did we see the deficiencies? What are the resources of the carbon emissions? And accordingly, I will move accordingly to what were the measures devised based on that assessment. And finally, I will share with you the results that we achieved so far. Well, a few years ago, we studied about climate change in schools, heard about it in the news, but in the last decade, we are now experiencing it. For example, as you can see, we have here 3 pictures. The first one is actually comes from Wales. This is where they are experiencing like unprecedented drought. On the right, you can see that there is extremely increase in hurricanes in the world. Finally, flash floods. This was a very recent one that happened in Athens, Greece. Well, you would ask, well, how is that really related to energy? Well, in 2016, well, at least in the United States, we're taking this example, the carbon dioxide produced, like the carbon dioxide produced from burning fossil fuels for energy was about 76% of the total. And this did not stop there, it's actually still increasing. There has been an evident 1.4% increase in the global energy-related CO2 emissions. You can check the bar charts on the right. You can see how we're not really actually mitigating. We're actually still going in the wrong direction. Well, energy includes several types: thermal, mechanical, and of course, which is the modern used electrical energy, which is the most important now these days in this era. And this is like attributed to 30% of the total energy. So it is very vital for us to scrutinize where we are using this energy, where it is being used or utilized. Are we wasting it in one way or another? From this part, I would like to introduce you to our project, which is called ICSI, which takes place in Jordan. Because in Jordan, the situation is not really that different. Well, these photos you see on the left side of the screen, they are just a few weeks ago due to flash floods. Well, unfortunate, like near 11 fatalities that day happened. Unfortunately, most of them were actually school students, which is very unfortunate. The flash floods is also one of the symptoms, one of the things we are experiencing due to climate change, where we have extreme rain in a very short period, and we end up with like 8 meters floods or something that covering cars and can be really destructive. Well, Jordan as well, from the first time, actually the situation is not that great, because the climate there is arid to semi-arid, and Jordan is one of the most water-scarce countries in the world. So, you know, the matter of water is really critical. Besides that, the geography of Jordan is quite harsh. It's not easy, so they need to pump water all over, like for really high levels at altitudes. For that reason, like around 15% of the energy produced is only being used for pumping water. Of course, we keep in mind that this energy is being produced by fossil fuels, which means burning, and we end up with more carbon emissions. Well, the project, which is by the German Agency for International Cooperation, or formerly known as the GTZ, the German Technical Cooperation. The overall goal of the project is to enable the conditions and develop markets for introducing modern integrated environmental and climate change mitigating technologies, and to produce and to create that idea of innovative green infrastructure in the water and wastewater sector. And of course, to provide the technical and the capacities for dealing with energy efficiency and reducing the emissions. The main objectives are first to reduce the energy consumption, reduce accordingly the direct or indirect CO2 emissions, and to most importantly facilitate direct knowledge transfer and capacity development, and increase the awareness on the importance of utilizing environmental and environment-friendly technologies that would, curb the emissions and cut the wastages in energy. Well, our treatment plant that that was studied, which is, we're showing the case study of Kofranja today. Kofranja wastewater treatment plant is in fact one of 3 utilities that have been assessed. Well, Kofranja is located right. I'll use the laser point. Is located in a governorate in the north of Jordan, which is right here in the north of Jordan. The other 2 utilities, I will also mention them in my presentation. The other one is called Ramtha. It is located here near the Syrian borders. And there's a third utility actually called Wadi Musa, which is located here next to Petra, the well-known Petra. Well, our focus will be, of course, Kofranja, but I will be also mentioning the other utilities, as there has been some kind of comparison between the efficiency of these 3 utilities. So Kofranja is located in the north, and it is like in good proximity to the capital Amman, about 68 kilometers. The utility there serves around 90,000 people. There's a couple of villages around there, and yeah, we can say there are around 90,000 people serviced, which is not the whole population, but it's a good amount of people. The treatment there is quite primitive, which is activated sludge. Activated sludge is the utility technology of 4 main stages. We start with preliminary treatment, where there's fine and coarse and fine screens, and then they go to the biological treatment, where it is used as extended aeration, which is very energy intensive, despite being well known for good treatment quality, but it's still very energy intensive. And then the water goes to tertiary treatment. There will be sand filters and UV treatment, and finally we'll have 2 products of the treatment, which is first the treated water. The treated water, in fact, in most utilities in Jordan is reused for agriculture, because, as I told you, Jordan is one of the most scarce countries in the world, so every drop of water matters. So it makes sense to make use of this treated wastewater. And in fact, there's different norms and standards that must be met for agricultural use. And in this specific utility, the water is not being pumped to anywhere, but it is being used all over the year for irrigation. And of course, the sludge is another issue that is being dried and then dump sited, which also is a problem if you want. It is also a problem when we're speaking about climate change, since it's also a source of emissions. Also, we are speaking about the design and the treatment technology in Kofranja. It was first designed for a population equivalent of around 72,000 people. So if we use interpolation, we expected to have 69,000 people, but in fact, the actual is now around 60,000. So it's still a new utility. Sorry, maybe I forgot to mention that it has been only commissioned in 2016. So it is quite a new treatment plant. Yeah, returning to the table, regarding the inflow, the current is around 3,500 cubic meters per day. And the organic load, which is represented by the biological oxygen demand, is expected to be around 4,000, but in fact they are only receiving 2,000, like 500 kilograms per day. Please keep in your mind these numbers, because we will need them to compare with the other utilities I mentioned formerly. And from here, I would like to start with our first step toward the assessment to analyze the situation in Kafranja concerning the GHG emissions and energy efficiency. So the utility went into a comprehensive audit, and then we, as I mentioned formally, we devised different options and so on. But we started, in fact, using energy and carbon emissions assessment and monitoring tool. It's an online tool. I think Salam, my colleague Sam, will discuss about the tool in her next presentation about the project WACLEM, which is water and wastewater companies for climate mitigation. We actually used their tool, which is a free tool that assess the energy and the carbon emissions in utilities. You can see that here's the results we got from the ECAM. Pardon me, maybe it's not the best resolution, but you can see here that there is a flashlight that indicating that the amount of emissions under treatment is not normal, as there is around 8 million kilograms CO2 equivalent for the year 2017, and the energy consumption was about 3 million kilowatt hour per year. But well, it's a good indication that there is a problem that we need to scrutinize and study further. So, and that's exactly what we did. We tried to check is these numbers actually within acceptable ranges, or are they abnormal, to double check again. So we run this this other comparison, and yeah, it's confirmed our first findings. Well, Kafranja apparently is consuming way too much energy compared to other utilities. Well, let me introduce you to the graph properly first. This bar chart includes here the size of the utilities in population equivalent, and the one here is how much it consumes, how much kilowatt hours per cubic meters. The ones in red are actually comes from a case study in Spain that used the same technology, which is also activated sludge. We inserted the energy consumption for the three utilities we had analyzed and audited at first, and it was clear that our maximum potential will be in Kafranja, as it is consuming about 2.23 kilowatt hours per cubic meter treated, which is really a massive number. There must be something wrong that we need to figure out. And we also take into consideration other parameters like the load received. We thought maybe this is because the load is way higher. Actually, it is also not acceptable to this level. And I will tell you what, because in 2000, as I mentioned, it is only commissioned in 2016, and till the moment it is only the capacity utilization is only 38%. And if we compare the energy efficiency, the total energy per population equivalent is for Kafranja is about 50, and such utility at the same size in Germany would consume like about 34. So we came up with different strategies to know what the problem is, and accordingly we came up with different measures. I will tell you now what were the measures and how did we know that this is the right thing to do. I will start with the fact that we found that the utility is working on full capacity with all its aerators, with all its power, let's say, despite being only 30–80% utilized. So like I like to depict it in another idea, like you have a big house, but you're only living in one room. Why would you light up the whole house? You know, you have to only use those that you actually need. So we started with amending and fixing the operation conditions of the utility. And that's by rearranging of the aeration tanks, reduce the amount of tanks that is being used according to the design load, to the actual loads, and not just arbitrarily, not to be arbitrarily working or not for no reason at all. We also realized that the treatment operation is not quite well. We find that from chemical point of view, their sludge age in the aeration tank is extremely long, which shows that their pumping for the return activated sludge or the waste is not quite acceptable, is not within acceptable ranges. So we also changed the operating conditions of the return and of the waste sludge of the pumps. Adding to that, we also we figured that we asked why they were in that condition actually. Why did they have wrong operating hours of RAS and WAS? And it was actually because they were facing difficulties with emptying the sludge. So we also work with them on fixing the dewatering machines and on the solar drying pits and so on, so we can fix the operating hours. After all, it was clearly that operators are not quite familiar with doing the right calculations. How many hours should they operate their pumps? How many tanks they should be utilized? And accordingly, we opted to keep them in close contact with a consultant, and our consultant was P2M Berlin, which is a water and wastewater company, a consultation company for these matters. And they were in close contact where they got professional advisory on their operation. A second very vital point we figured is that the maintenance. Well, you know, the efficiency stands for how much you get divided by how many you give to the energy. So when you are giving too much energy and getting very less, so it's a huge loss. And when your equipments are not in a very well conditions, they are not well maintained, you will give them a lot of electricity, but you will get very little aeration, and that was very vital. So we started with maintaining all aerators by replacing oils, as silly as it sounds, but you will figure out by the end of the presentation. I hope I will be able to convince you by the end of this presentation that this is a very important point that really would save a lot of energy and prolongs the life of the utilities. The same was for the pumps. All pumps were operating in full capacity despite not being, so they were really in a very bad conditions. So we opted to maintain all these pumps. Same goes for the decanters and so on, and the compressors, etc., etc. All the energy consuming devices that aren't being utilized in the utility. And of course, all the problems were operational, so it made full sense to introduce the operators and the technicians there to the proper operation, and to introduce them to the importance of energy check and analysis, that how often they should check their consumption, to check if things are within normal levels and normal ranges or not, so they can act upon it and return to their remote assistant by P2M and act on it to fix it. They also were introduced to the ECOM tool, I will not spend much time here because it will be rather discussed in another presentation, so they can be also aware and acquainted with the fact that the utility is emitting emissions, and we can quantify it to control it. And of course, as a utility, as a treatment plan, they have to have good lab results so they can make decisions. And from that point, we found that their decisions was quite arbitrary. So we started with a very important thing, which is the data acquisition and management system. As you know, we're actually now in the era of data where we can only take decisions upon it, where I think now most jobs are related to data science and the management of our data to make decisions. So we provided them with data acquisition systems like dissolved oxygen sensors, flow meters, level meters, energy meters, and so on. And we trained the utility on collecting data properly, how to analyze it, and how to act according to these results. Last but not least, which is the most, was the first goal of our project, is to provide environmental or technologies that would conserve the environment. In our cases, we found that most of the motors are actually still despite are not that of a high efficiency. So we increased the efficiency of the motors. We also provided variable frequency drives. The variable frequency is responsible for running the pumps according to the load they have, and not being operating on full power and consuming way too much energy that we do not need. We also, it was also important to work on the pumping, so we provided smart electrical panels to make programs and to keep specific operating hours for each. So, well, finally, I would like to share with you the final results so far. Well, since the project is still going on and there's still a lot to be implemented, but so far we have only implemented the soft measures I mentioned before. Well, all of those before are actually only devised measures. The ones that have been implemented are the soft ones, such as the maintenance, the operation, the capacity, and the data. The technology is still in the pipeline, to be honest. But despite that, we already have achieved. We're able to reduce the energy consumption about 21%. Or if we took it and compared to the population equivalent service, about 28% was reduced just by these almost no cost or low cost measures. What I really like to share in this presentation is this idea, is that sometimes, as I return to my example, it's silly when you say just turn off the lights that you do not use. Sometimes it comes in a more in disguised in a mask of more technical complications. Your job is just to keep on searching where you are wasting energy and solve it, because in most times before you go for advanced technologies, searching for renewables, you have to ask yourself, are we using are we in the right conditions? Are we actually using maximum efficiency of our utility? I think this is the first question that we should, this is the starting point for our decarbonizing mission. From now on, I leave you with that message, and I end my presentation. Thank you a lot for your attention, and I'm very happy to answer your questions and or hear your comments, of course. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mohammad, for your very interesting presentation. And now the floor to Salam. Thank you.
Well, hello everyone. This is Salam Almomany from the water program Jordan, GIZ water program in Jordan. And I would like first to thank you all for attending and joining us today in this webinar, and to thank the Copenhagen Center also for giving us this opportunity to present the WACLIM project, Water and Wastewater Companies for Climate Mitigation project, and its work in Jordan. So I'll start quickly by giving you some background information on the concept of the Water and Wastewater Companies for Climate Mitigation project, which supports the climate change mitigation efforts in the water sector using a cross-sectoral approach that links water, energy, and food security to developing the concept for climate resilient and low-emission water industry. So I would like here to elaborate on the incentives and how to overcome barriers. From the energy efficiency side, the utilities are water utilities are among the largest energy consumers at municipal levels. Technical measures to address energy efficiency issues at water and wastewater utilities generate 10 to 40% energy savings per measure and have between 1 to 5 years of payback periods. On the other hand, water efficiency, there's a huge water losses in distribution networks, represent both wasted water and wasted energy. Water loss reduction in general and pressure management in particular could play a significant role in improving this situation. The nutrient recovery by reusing water, reusing the phosphorus and nitrogen as fertilizers, reusing the reclaimed treated wastewater for agricultural irrigation and generating income is another incentive. In addition to the energy generation and the reduction of methane and generation of energy from, for example, service as a cost-effective method to reduce GHGs and increase energy security, and enhance, of course, the economic growth and improve the environmental quality. So from that point, I'd like also to introduce you to the WACLIM project approach. The WACLIM project is actually a joint venture between the GIZ and the IWA, the International Water Association, and the fund or the funding, the donor is the German Federal Ministry of the Environment, Nature Conservation, and Building and Nuclear Safety. The overall objective, of course, of the WACLIM project is to introduce the greenhouse gas emissions and introduce the greenhouse gas reduction technologies and measures, and of course the CO2 balance of water and wastewater companies to be improved. The duration of the WACLIM project in Jordan the project started in Jordan in 2016 and it ends by May 2019 this year. So the project, actually, the overall project objective is realized by 3 main output activities. This, of course, the introduction of pilot measures and implementation of the WACLIM roadmap, which I will explain in my next slide, and the introduction of the GHG reduction and energy efficient measures in the water utilities, but also the project looks at the enabling environment and the framework conditions at the countries, the partner countries. So it also works at developing institutional framework and making financing mechanisms available to utility. In addition to that, the project also work in increasing the impact by dissemination of the WACLIM approach via development of international guidelines, events, communication material, and other means. So again, back to the WACLIM roadmap. So the WACLIM project, as I mentioned before, looks at the full water cycle from groundwater wells until the reuse of the reclaimed wastewater. The project starts with assessment with the a greenhouse gas assessment to the water utility, where it can identify the major sources of greenhouse gases. It can further identify the opportunities. Where are the opportunities to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions, in addition to monitoring the reduction on emissions, and thus achieving the GHG mitigation targets. That, of course, requires a lot of data connection and collection, and the cooperation with the water utility and the operators. The project start its assessment by using the ECAM tool, the Energy Performance and Carbon Emission Assessment and Monitoring tool, which my colleague Mohammad just mentioned. So the ECAM tool enables water utilities to measure and manage their greenhouse gas emissions and energy consumption at a system-wide level by identifying areas to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, increase energy savings, and improve overall efficiencies to reduce costs. The ECAM also offers a holistic approach for urban water utilities to shift to low energy and low carbon water management. And the three main functions of the ECAM tool is first to assess the greenhouse gas emissions, as I mentioned before, but also to evaluate the energy performance at the water utility, in addition to helping the utility to identify the opportunities and improve its GHG emissions, or reduce its GHG emissions. And the key factors for the tools are that to start with is that this tool is completely free and open source online tool, and I really encourage you all to go to the WACLIM website that appears here in this slide, and try the ECAM tool with the data you have for your utilities, and assess the greenhouse gas emissions and experiment with it. So this tool also is based on the IPCC methodology. The IPCC is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and it also allows the monitoring and reporting and verification for climate change mitigation projects. So it really helps also in reporting and verification of greenhouse gases, and thus the meeting the NDCs of each country. The project is implemented in 4 countries, in Peru, in Mexico, in Thailand, and of course in Jordan. And from there I start to introduce you first to the intervention area in Jordan, where the WACLIM project is being implemented. I'll just skip this slide, as my colleague Mohammad has already presented the situation in Jordan, and go directly to Madaba. So the project is being implemented at Madaba Governorate, which is located in the middle of Jordan. 35 kilometers southwest to the capital Amman. It has an area of around 1,000 square meters and a population of 200,000 inhabitants. The number of subscribers in this water utility is around 34,000 subscribers, and the daily water supply per capita is around 134 liters. The water utility at Madaba Governorate is operated by the Jordan Water Company, Miyahuna Madaba Water Management. The main drinking water resources in Madaba Governorate is Al Hidan Wells, which is situated on an altitude of 330 meters above sea level. However, much of the region's population lives at the elevations between 750 to 800 meters above sea level, and thus, of course, require a lot of energy and intensive energy for water pumping. There are around 6 pumping stations and 5 storage reservoirs in Madaba Governorate. And also there is a wastewater treatment plant, the Madaba wastewater treatment plant, that has the design capacity of 7,600 cubic meter per day. And these days, it has almost reached to its capacity inflow. It's receiving around 7,500 cubic meter per day. So after assessing the water utility or the water cycle of Madaba using the ECAM tool, it was found that most of the energy consumption, most of the greenhouse gas emissions happens at the water supply side. As you can see in this graph, 61% of the greenhouse gas emissions comes from the water supply. That means the abstraction, the distribution of the drinking water. On the other hand, 39% comes from the wastewater, and mainly from the wastewater treatment and sludge production. So the total CO2 emissions at the baseline year, which was 2017, was around 29,000 tons of CO2 equivalent, and the energy consumption was at around 30.5 million kilowatt hour. So after assessing the greenhouse gas emissions and energy consumption, the water cycle of Madaba, we went further and assessed in details the components of the water cycle, along with with our consultant from the Water, Energy and Environment Center at the University of Jordan. A detailed assessment was carried and it took into consideration all the pumps efficiencies at the well, at the groundwater wells, the distribution system, the pressure management, the distribution system and network, in addition to the wastewater treatment process, the reuse options, and many other factors. From that point, it was found that the cost of energy consumption in Madaba water facilities reached to 5 million euros, and in 2018, an average energy consumption in Hidan wells is 0.6 kilowatt hour per cubic meter, with a total energy consumption of 6.3 million kilowatt hour in 2018, and the cost of this energy consumption was around 975,000 euros in 2018. And in the distribution side, in Madaba Reservoir Pumping Station, which is the main reservoir and main pumping station in Madaba Governorate, the average energy consumption was 0.63 kilowatt hour per cubic meter, with a total energy consumption of 4.1 million kilowatt hour and the cost of 475,000 euros, and that was in 2017, the baseline year. However, this cost of energy consumption has increased significantly in 2018 to reach to 555,000 euros, and that's due to the increase in the tariff, electricity tariff for the water sector. And in the wastewater treatment plant, the energy consumption was around 2.3 million kilowatt hour per year, with a total cost of 420,000 euros in 2018. After assessing the baseline conditions at Madaba Governorate water cycle, the major sources of greenhouse gas emissions and energy consumptions, as I mentioned before, were identified. Accordingly, the GHG reduction options were also identified and analyzed, and these options included energy efficient pumps in the reservoir, in the well site, in addition to the optimization of the wastewater treatment and the installation of photovoltaics in wastewater utility and also in the groundwater well fields. The identified and optimal project design actually can reach to a reduction of 11,000 tons of CO2 equivalent per year, and the savings of around $1 million per year, 6 gigawatt hour per year, and it of course can serve the full population of Madaba. To further assess these options, a feasibility study was also conducted to study the costs and benefits of each of these options. So as you can see in this graph, the major options were studied was introducing solar energy in the wastewater treatment plant, and also the utilization of sludge from the wastewater treatment plant to produce methane and thus produce electricity, in addition to the retrofitting of Madaba reservoir pumps in Madaba reservoir pumping stations, as well as the rehabilitation of wells pumps and the optimization and improvement in the distribution network at the drinking water supply side with pressure management systems. From that point, the selection of which measures to be implemented under the WACLIM project, of course, based on the available budget at the WACLIM project, but also at the feasibility of each of these measures. The agreed upon measure was to retrofit the Madaba reservoir pumps, in which the old pumps in Madaba reservoir pumping station were replaced with 6 energy efficient pumps, 3 of them with high head and 3 of them with low head. And these pumps, the 6 new pumps, are controlled by variable frequency drives, VFDs, and in order to maximize the savings, 2 pumps have been recently operated, and the rest will actually be operated by hopefully next week, maximum before mid of April. So as you can see in this photo, the photo of the older pumps and the new system in progress. The work was still in progress, so this is not the final look of the pumping station. With this initiative, the main objective was, of course, to reduce the energy consumption and water losses at the pumping station and provide better service to the customers. The total investment of this measure, the refurbishing of the pumping station, was at around 300,000 euros, with initial estimations of the savings at around 32% of the baseline energy consumption. That translates to 1.3 million kilowatt hour per year and 220,000 euros at the current electricity tariff. As you can see, the payback period of this measure would not exceed the 2 years. So that's it from our side. Thank you all for your attention.
Thank you very much for your very interesting presentation. It's really great to hear all of these case studies. And now I would give the floor to Nisreen. Thank you very much.
So good afternoon from Cairo, and thanks to Copenhagen Center for giving me this opportunity to participate in this interesting webinar. Actually, I'll take you now to another scope, as Mohammad has been presenting with Salam the impacts or implications from water sector to the energy sector. I will take you to the implications from the energy sector to the water sector, presenting 3 case studies on solar pumping in the MENA region, case studies from Tunisia, Morocco, and Jordan. In my presentation, I will give a short introduction on the Nexus Dialogue program and give an overview of solar pumping irrigation systems in the MENA region and present a study on the impacts of solar pumping in Tunisia and another one in Morocco, and WEF Nexus assessment of solar energy farming in Jordan. As for the Nexus Dialogue program, it's a program co-funded by the BMZ and the European Union. It is managed by Global Nexus Secretariat, hosted by GIZ based in Bonn. It works in 5 regions in Central Asia, Southern Africa, Niger Basin, Latin America, and the MENA region, which I'm responsible for implementing its activities in. The main partner in the MENA region is the League of Arab States. The main objective of the Nexus Dialogue program is to support the regions in the realization of water, energy, food nexus, to enhance security of water, energy, and food for individual human beings, while ensuring sustainable resource use of the related resources. The program has 2 phases. The phase 1, which ends up in 2019 with the theoretical base, and the phase 2 with the application of Nexus infrastructure projects in the region. As for the activities of the Nexus Dialogue program in the MENA region, it's mainly supporting the League of Arab States with the providing Nexus knowledge, compilation of Nexus experts through Nexus capacity building trainings, to carry out Nexus country assessments, one for Tunisia and other for Sudan, and to carry out also small Nexus demonstration projects, one on solar pumping irrigation systems and the other on solar energy farming, and finally developing a regional Nexus action plan. This is conducted all with partners in the region working on Nexus issues such as Minute Project, UNESCO, and other partners. The Nexus Dialogue program has initiated a Nexus resource platform, which is a central knowledge hub on water, energy, food security nexus. It has many reports, articles, and news with a special content to the MENA region and with Arabic content as well. And I invite you all to have a look at this knowledge hub and also to contribute with your studies, with your projects, and any content regarding Nexus. And you can see the link to this platform on the screen. The solar pumping irrigation systems in the MENA region is one of the fastest growing applications for solar energy technologies because of the rapidly growing prices of fossil pumping installations, the phasing out of power and diesel subsidies for farmers and agro industries, the extension of farming and hence irrigation into remote regions and connected to the grid, and regarding the quickly dropping costs of PV panels and the improved technical performances of the solar pumping technologies. The solar pumping irrigation systems have many benefits, such as creating jobs with economic benefits, reducing the farmers' recurring production costs, mitigating climate change impacts. Actually, it is considered one of the sustainable green businesses. Yet, these systems these benefits come at risks on the other side, on another sector, as it may encourage greater water extraction, which lead to overexploitation of groundwater, and which is considered a sustainability risk for the environment. Therefore, solar pumping has to be integrated into a broader approach to reduce overconsumption of water and to find ways to monitor and regulate water extraction. From here, the Nexus Regional Dialogue in the MENA region took the initiative to conduct a study on the impacts of solar pumping in Tunisia in collaboration with some agencies in Tunisia, such as the Ministry of Agriculture, the Energy Agency, the GIZ Tunisia office, also with the FAO regional office. The objectives of this study was to understand the links between the use of solar pumps by farmers and the potential impacts on water consumption, to examine the socio-economic effects of solar pumps, to highlight rules, regulations, and policies needed to manage the risks and realize the potentials of solar pumping irrigation systems, and finally to provide recommendations to promote sustainable use of the technology. As for Tunisia, there are large parts of groundwater resources that are not renewable, with also some subsidies on diesel, which are continuously decreasing and with energy costs increasing. The government of Tunisia is subsidizing the installation of solar pumping irrigation systems. There are mainly two systems for this subsidization. It goes up to 50% of the installation costs. The major parts of farmers don't pay their water extraction fees. And here there were two hypotheses. The first one is that SPIS lead to zero operation costs for farmers. Therefore, farmers may thus increase the volumes pumped to intensify their agriculture or extend the irrigated surface. The approach of the study was to have a small survey to gain evidence and study trends concerning these hypotheses with a sample of 24 farms in 4 governorates. Actually, it's a small sample, not representative one, but regarding that, there are only 124 SPIS subsidized by the Energy Agency. This can help in giving a comprehensive overview on what's happening there with these installations. 4 of these wells were illegal, and 20 were subsidized by the agency. Also, there was an overview of the literature and analysis of the existing laws and regulations, and the results of this study was validated with institutions from water, energy, and food sectors. The questionnaire for the survey contained general data on the interviewee, the farm, the production, the irrigation techniques, the solar pumping irrigation systems used, and the impacts of the solar pumping in these farms. I'll mention some results of this study. Regarding the financial parameters, the major motivation for investment was from the farmers' side was to save on energy spending, and the owners were actually highly satisfied with this technology. The investment cost of SPIS is considered to be high. This is not regarding the running cost, of course, and the fragmentation of agricultural holdings considerably limits the large-scale dissemination of the solar pumping. Profitability of SPIS are also relatively low due to the preferential tariffs of electricity in the agricultural sector, and these systems were financed from farmers' own funds, with none of them set up with a financing scheme incorporating bank loans. As for the irrigation systems, all farms use drip irrigation systems, which has enhanced the value of the water at the plots, and this is mandatory in Tunisia. None of the farmers have received advice to calculate their water demand, and all individual owners reject the idea of collective drilling for the fear of difficulties for managing common property, with the risk of not having enough water for their crops. As for their water storage, 37% of farmers don't invest in water storage due to their limited financial resources, and actually these water storage systems were undersized because of constraints in financial resources. With the minimal operating cost, the solar pumping irrigation systems may lead to an increase in water consumption. This was a result from this study, as more than 80% of farmers pump more water than before using solar pumping irrigation systems. Farmers also believe that they use free and inexhaustible water, as more than half of the farmers have increased the irrigated areas, and 88% of the farmers believe that increasing the amounts of water increases necessarily the yield. As for the monitoring of water demand and water fees, 2/3 of the farmers monitor their water demand only irregularly, and 50% don't have water meters. They monitor to control the performance of the soil pumping systems. And none of the farmers pay the obligatory water fees. These were some implications on the water sector, and as for the agricultural sector, the access to the soil pumping irrigation systems actually encourage farmers to exploit new dry or unused agricultural areas and to expand the agricultural activity. It also enhanced the job creation and encouraged the local workforce to stay in the region. These were the main findings of the study, and I will not mention the recommendations here. I will mention another study also conducted by GIZ with the impacts of soil pumping irrigation systems in Morocco, and some findings of this study, and I will combine all the recommendations together for these two studies. Actually, this study also was implemented by GIZ with many programs for GIZ in Morocco and in collaboration with FAO. Actually, the setting or the context in Morocco differs a little bit from Tunisia, as there is a planned subsidy of 50% of the cost of installing PV panels in Morocco to small holdings up to 5 hectares. And the hypothesis for this study is the same as in Tunisia, which is that the installation of a solar pumping system increases a farmer's water consumption because of the reduced costs. And the study also aimed to test this hypothesis through survey of farmers. The general survey was in 3 regions in Morocco, with a larger sample. It was 50%, it was for 150 farmers, 50% of them using soil pumping irrigation systems and 50% of them not using these systems. And the questionnaire were on the identification of the farm, characterization of the well properties and pumping equipment, the agricultural production, and the agroeconomics. Some of the main findings of this survey was that, as in Tunisia, there was a very high level of satisfaction of solar pumping due to low operating cost of these pumps. 96% of the farmers think about converting to solar pumping for economic reasons and to get a continuous energy supply, yet they haven't done this conversion because of absence of subsidies, the high investment costs, and refusal of suppliers to use the installment payment method. The impacts of the solar pumping on water consumption showed a trend towards increased water consumption through the extension of the irrigated areas, the introduction of intercropping, and the increase in water allocation to the same crop. The increase of water consumption is variable in the zones, and this is according to the water availability and the type of crop, as the increase in consumption is much more attributed to small and medium-sized farms. As for the socioeconomic situation of the farmers and the impact of conversion to solar pumping, for smallholders, the economic impact is substantial, and the conversion to solar pumping impacts the socioeconomic situation of the farmer through cost savings and the improvement of the crop profit margin. And the farmers use these savings on operating costs in investing in increasing their production, the agricultural production, and social family life. Farmers in Morocco also, regarding the conditional subsidy of solar pumping, see that most of them are, or half of them are in favor of conditional subsidy, but under a main condition of guaranteeing them sufficient volumes of water to cover the crops' water needs. From these two studies, I can mention some recommendations regarding first the rules and regulations regarding using solar pumping irrigation systems. First of all, it has to introduce control mechanisms to ensure the payment of water fees and sanctioning of illegal wells, to limit the volume of water that the farmer is allowed to pump, and to install water meters. Also from Morocco, the lighter recommendations is from in gray are from Morocco. Require the correct sizing of solar pumping installations, as proper sizing prevents risks of increased water consumption, to avoid oversizing, and to prohibit the extension of irrigation area and the introduction of intercropping. As for the subsidies, from Tunisia, it was recommended to condition the subsidy to the introduction of a water management plan, and from Morocco, it was recommended to install a localized drip irrigation system that is not mandatory in Morocco. It was also recommended to condition the subsidy to the existence of a storage system, and to encourage the collective solar pumping irrigation systems through granting preferential subsidy rates to farmers wishing to switch from individual to collective pumping. Also, it was recommended to reinforce control inspections after installation to ensure the use of a metering system, and this can be by carrying out visits to check the authorized volumes, the extension of the irrigated area, and the introduction of intercropping as mentioned by the Morocco study. Also, to penalize the installers that install at illegal wells with some withdrawal of certificate and other measures. As for the research and development, it was recommended also to create GIS maps to track illegal wells, as also to mention that in Tunisia this has been initiated already, and to use remote sensing for extension and crop pattern control. Also to promote holistic planning for SPIS, links between to link between energy, water, and agricultural production, and to elaborate for a practical guide on the sizing of the agricultural solar pump installations. Also, it was recommended to conduct nexus audits for large farms to assess the impacts on energy, water, and agriculture, and improve the sustainability of the farm, and introduce digital control tools to promote simplified smartphone applications for irrigation management, and to assess and compare the impacts of the introduction of solar pumping on climate change mitigation and adaptation. As for the capacity development and awareness raising, it was recommended to raise awareness to the installers, farmers, training centers, public agricultural services, and the civil society, and to promote the cooperation between institutions working on agriculture, water, and energy. Actually, these are the some highlights on the recommendations of these studies, and here I'll just mention another study conducted by Nexus Regional Dialogue on water energy food nexus assessment of solar energy farming interactions at Azraq in Jordan, with some highlights from India, and the link of the study is on the presentation, so you can access this study. I'll just mention the idea or the approach of this study and the main recommendations regarding the application of solar pumping in India. Actually, this solar energy farming, or the concept, was initiated by GIZ Aquam program, which is adaptation to climate change in the water sector in the MENA region, in cooperation with the Ministry of Water and Irrigation and the Highland Water Forum. The main approach or the main rationale of this project was to reduce the abstraction of groundwater resources in Azraq by substituting irrigated agriculture with another source of income by investing in solar energy. This was suggested due to the severe depletion of Azraq Basin that was covered by vast wetlands until the early 90s. So a pilot plant with a size of 200 kilowatt power was intended to be built at Azraq as a showcase to demonstrate the feasibility of solar farming. This was intensively researched and consulted with different stakeholders. And the project got a cabinet decision to award an exception due to its size to be implemented. Also, a feasibility study was conducted for this project, yet the project faced many obstacles and ended up in 2018 with no implementation. From here, the Nexus Regional Dialogue thought of initiating or conducting a study on solar energy farming in Jordan to suggest a model for implementing the water energy food nexus approach in Jordan to motivate farmers to invest in solar plants and preserve groundwater, and to encourage farmers to shift from being fossil fuel energy consumers to clean energy producers and reducing CO2 emissions. And as Mohammad has mentioned, Jordan, 15% of the water generated is of the energy is using for pumping water, and 98% of energy produced is from fossil fuels. So it's an issue, a very urgent issue in Jordan, using the or going for solar energy applications. Yet this was on a smaller scale than the country is doing now. Also, the study intended to analyze the international solar energy farming experiences with special focus on India to derive some lessons learned and illustration of options for enhancing solar energy farming in Jordan and the region. I will not mention the outcomes of the study. There were many outcomes regarding the nexus, the institutionalization of the water energy food nexus in the country, but I'll just mention some lessons learned regarding solar pumping, which is the title of this presentation. One lesson learned from India is that solar pumping irrigation systems could be combined with a feed-in tariff, as farmers can make rational decisions about how to use energy and water. They can sell electricity, they can have rainwater harvesting, post-harvesting treatments, cooling for dairy products, or drying for vegetables like tomatoes, for instance. Also, community-based approaches that reorganize farmers as energy cooperatives can achieve a higher level of integration by bundling the required financial and land resources, contributing to better regulation and monitoring, as we have seen in Morocco and Tunisia. That wasn't so welcomed by farmers, but maybe this can have some, this can be implemented through some measures for convincing farmers, and here the capacity building also plays a great role. Also, the specific dual solar agricultural design of the solar energy farming plants may allow productive land use for agriculture underneath the solar panels, although this may increase water use. And if adequate incentives are not attached to these programs, cheap energy raises water use, as also in the case of Tunisia and Morocco. From the other lessons learned were that mini grids and with storage options may be suggested where it is impossible to connect all farms using solar mega plants and national grids. Also, the net metering of solar pumps may be financially supported, working like the case of rooftop solar power, and the high feed-in tariffs may represent another form of subsidization, and this may promote a wide use of solar pumping, especially by marginalized and poor farmers. The subsidization through cheap loans by governmental banks might not be enough to encourage farmers due to the high investment costs, and public engagement is needed through special loan programs to increase the access to affordable loans for farmers. So these are the main outcomes and recommendations of these three studies. So where can we use these outcomes or recommendations? Actually, FAO regional office is going to conduct a study on the impacts of solar pumping irrigation systems in Egypt, and we have the opportunity now to have comparative analysis between the three studies in Tunisia, Morocco, and Egypt, and providing some policy advice to policymakers. Also, the League of Arab States is organizing a regional policy dialogue on solar pumping with the Arab Organization for Agricultural Development and FAO Regional Office. Here, 3 or 4 questions can be raised and discussed at this regional dialogue. What are the viable business models for solar pumping irrigation systems in the MENA region? What types of capacity development programs are needed to support farmers? And how can solar pumping irrigation systems empower women and promote gender equity? And finally, what are the opportunities for knowledge exchange and technology transfer through the implications of solar pumping irrigation systems? These systems are newly introduced in the region, and actually there's a need for more research and more applied research to recognize all the implications of using these systems on the energy sector, on the water sector, and on the agricultural sector as well. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Nisreen. It was really interesting to see also the water, food, energy nexus. And now I saw that we already have quite a number of questions from our attendees to our panelists. So we can start with a question for Salam. One of the attendees asked, as a comment, Salam, you indicated that the electricity for the water supply is 14% of Jordan total. Does that include water heating for residential, commercial, and industrial sector, or is that in addition? Thank you very much.
Yes, Valerie, it's at the 14%, it's for the water sector. So it's for all uses of water, the industrial, the commercial, and the municipal levels.
Okay, thank you. So I hope that the attendee got the clarification on his doubt. Moreover, there is a question for Mohammad. You mentioned about soft and hard measures in the roadmap. Will it be possible to achieve successful energy efficient outcomes just by implementing soft ones? And also, does your framework acknowledge legal tools? Thank you.
Sorry, I did not hear the last part of the question.
The last part is a question about how does your framework acknowledge legal tools, legal frameworks?
All right, I'll start with the first part of your question. Yes, the point of my presentation was that sometimes that very minor stuff, that's very low to minimum cost measures can save a lot. And that was evident in the case study, where the savings were shown were only for the soft measures, and while the hard measures, such as the new technologies, are now being implemented and not yet monitored.
Okay, great.
The second question, the thing is that there's actually other projects, GSF projects, that are working on the framework, so it's kind of out of my scope.
Okay, thank you, and I hope that it got clarified the question of the attendee. Now there is a question for Nisreen regarding how has climate change affected the nexus in the MENA region, because our attendee asked, commented that you told about the importance of the agriculture sector for the world energy food nexus. So the question is, how has climate change affected this nexus in the MENA region? Thank you.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, clearly.
Yeah. As for the MENA region and the climate change effects, the MENA region is one of the most regions affected by climate change in the world, although it's one of the least regions in the world contributing to the emissions of carbon CO2 emissions. So it's not contributing to climate change effects, but it is affected by it. Climate change is considered a cross-cutting issue through the nexus, the water, energy, food nexus, which we call WEF nexus. And although it's not mentioned explicitly in the nexus approach, but we always consider it in the in dealing with the three sectors, because the implications are highly connected to the energy sector, to the water sector, and to the agricultural sector. So we consider it when dealing with climate change. As for the solar pumping irrigation system, I mentioned that there's a need also to study the effects of using solar pumping to the climate change implications and to the emissions of carbon dioxide. This needs also some studies. I mentioned also that solar pumping is newly introduced in the region, and it has to be comprehensively studied through empirical research, maybe.
Great, thank you. Also, here is a comment of one of the attendees to Mohammed regarding the fact that you concentrate in gas emission on total gas emissions. So I think the question is that the use of emissions per capita makes the Saudi Arabia the number 1, and the US number 3, and China number 12, and India number 20th country. So why using the emission per capita as
well, the per capita was used well in the utility scales, to take into account the load, is to identify the size of the utility. Like we can't compare only kilowatt hours per cubic meters, while the utility size are quite different. That's why I opted to use specific measures, which is per population served.
Thank you for the clarification. Also, another question is regarding the water situation in Jordan, and how much the water shortage there explains why Jordan needs to use a treated wastewater. Thank you.
Well, each person allowance of water per day is around 140 liters, compared to the global number, which is around 500. Shows how the water is, is scarce, and we have to adapt accordingly. Like in each neighborhood, water is pumped like 2 days in a week only, and they have to store it till the next week. So, yeah.
Great, thank you. And here a last question for today's webinar, and is for Salam. If could you please explain the business model behind your case study? Thank you.
Well, actually, the refurbishment of the pumping station was taken care of by the project, Wakram project. So it was more of helping the utility in saving energy consumption and saving the greenhouse gas emissions. However, the project also working with the utility on developing a business model for other for upscaling or multiplication of this pilot, if I may say, that includes the private sector participation. I hope this answered the question.
Yes, perhaps you could elaborate a bit more about how the private sector has been involved so that our audience will have a more practical idea of how this happened? Thank you.
Yes, of course. There have been also in Madaba utility some experience with the private sector, where the private sector partnered with technology providers and get a loan from the EBRD to invest in one of the pumping stations, where of course that was also under the or in cooperation or with the facilitation of the GIZ water program here in Jordan. So the investment of refurbishing one of the pumping station was done by the private sector, and the private sector operated the pumping station for a number of years. In that case, it was 5 years, where it could benefit from part of the savings, and the payback period was also less than, well, it was around 2.5 to 3 years. So this is one example, one practical example of how the private sector can participate.
Great, thank you. And actually, we got a final last-minute question for Mohammad and Salam, and would be good perhaps to conclude this webinar with this question. It's how unique is your case study? Also commenting that in 2012, it's strange for the plant to be commissioned without VFD. So perhaps if you have any input on this, thank you very much.
Well, as always known, the maximum savings are the ones before you start the project, where you invest from the first time, from even before starting the commissioning with proper technology. Yeah, unfortunately, we had to deal with an existing system where it is not optimum, it's not the best. So we had to figure out where things are being lost, where things are being wasted, and try to optimize accordingly. So yeah, the VFD, the variable frequency drive, was one of options, since we are still in the very beginning of the life of the utilities. The load is not maximum, so we had to find the technology that adapts to the current situation. And yeah, and this is where we used the VFDs.
Great, thank you very much for your detailed answers to all these questions. And ladies and gentlemen, finally we have come to the end of the webinar. I would like to say thank you to the panelists for the informative and interesting presentations, and to the audience for their active participation. Hopefully this webinar will be beneficial for all stakeholders involved in energy efficiency. Also because Friday, 22nd of March is the World Water Day, so this webinar comes well on time. And thank you for your attention, and wish you a good day or night from Copenhagen.